Speaking of Daniel giving something a thorough review,
Yes.
Daniel has his solo thing of the week.
Yeah. This movie's been on my radar for a little while, and so I thought I'd finally give it a watch. And that is the Autopsy of Jane Doe. Um, this is I guess I would describe it as a supernatural horror,
Hmm.
but it it doesn't start out that way. It actually starts out more like a murder mystery. So the movie begins. There's a triple homicide in a house in a little town in Virginia, and they're trying to figure out, like, how this family died. Who killed this family. And one of the sheriff's deputy notes that there was no sign of forced entry in the house, and it actually looks more like the people inside were trying to get out rather than someone trying to get in. Um, which that gets explained at the end of the movie why that was. Then they go down to the basement, and then that's where they find Jane Doe, uh, buried under the floor. She's, like, complete. She's completely naked, and there's nothing. She doesn't. There's nothing with her that can identify who she is. And then we meet the Tildens, uh, Tommy the father and Austin the son. And from here on, I'm just going to refer to him as the father and the son. Um, and the father is played by Brian Cox, who you'd recognize him if you saw him. He's like one of these real prolific character actors. Um,
Let's
he
find
played
out.
he played Colonel.
Okay.
Yeah, he was Colonel Stryker in X-Men 2. Um, and then Emil Hirsch plays the son. He's been in a lot of different movies. I remember him from Lone Survivor. He played Danny Dietz in that. But but anyway, so you got a father and son, morticians or coroners, and then the son's girlfriend shows up, and they're going to go off to a movie. But then the sheriff arrives with the Jane Doe, and the father is going to do the autopsy on her by himself, while the son goes off with his girlfriend. But then the son decides, well, I think I'll help my dad out with the autopsy, and tells his girlfriend, hey, come back later in the night. We should be done by then, because the sheriff needs a cause of death by the morning. So they immediately start doing the autopsy, and they find that just nothing makes any sense with her. They see, like, they don't see any obvious wounds or anything on the body. um there's no signs of, like, any rigor mortis, but at the same time they look at her eyes, and if you see her in the poster, her eyes are really gray, which is what people's eyes look like when they've been dead for a long time. um but they do note that her wrists and her ankles are broken.
Huh.
uh yeah, and her tongue's been cut off. And so immediately, like, the father thinks that might be some kind of, like, trafficking thing, because he's seen that
Right.
kind of thing before. And there is obvious signs of SA. So they're like, okay, well, that's might fit. But then as soon as they cut her open, they find that, again, nothing makes any sense. Her lungs are burned up, like she's been in a fire. There's, like, scar tissue all over, like, her heart and stomach and everything. So yeah, they're just completely baffled. And then they find that, like, a flower inside, like a real poisonous flower. I can't remember what it was called. Oh, and the other thing too is they look under her fingernails and toenails, and there's peat underneath it. Yeah.
It's like she was thrown into the swamp or something.
Well, that's what they're trying to figure out, because they're like, because peat only grows because they're in Virginia, and peat's
Hmm.
like up in New England.
Right, because that's the kind of cold, moist environment.
Right. Yeah, and so they find all this out, and then they also find a shroud on there with a bunch of like drawings and pictograms and writing on it, and they're just like, okay, they have no idea what's going on, and then it gets really weird when they actually look under her skin, and the same writing that's on the shroud is all over the inside of her. And so they're just like, okay, and that's when it turns into a supernatural horror, because then weird stuff starts happening everywhere. Like they listen to the radio, and they hear like a newscaster coming on giving a weather report of, oh, this is a real bad thunderstorm, we're getting a lot of rain, and da da da. And then he says, well, one thing is certain, you are not leaving that place. And the son kind of looks at the radio like, what? And so and then like, like it's kind of the tip, kind of like a lot of the tropes of this stuff, like the lights are flickering on and off, and then then like the power goes out, and of course they can't, the power goes out, so and the only way for them to get out is by this elevator. And of course they can't get up there because there's not enough power for them to get up in the elevator.
So when does
And
the body inevitably start moving around on its own?
it doesn't.
Really? Okay.
No. But the other bodies in the morgue start moving around on their own. And so so they're just like, so the father and son are just like freaking out. They're trying to figure out like, okay, well, we got to get out of here. They can't get out of there, and it's this body is just screwing with them. And then so like a little spoiler here, they finally decide, okay, they do a little more, they go back to the body, and of course they try to like burn the body. First of all, they try to take the body to the crematorium, but then they can't get out of the exam room, so they're like, okay, well, screw this. So the son grabs some rubbing alcohol and douses her in rubbing alcohol, and then the father lights some matches and lights are on fire, but the body doesn't burn. So they're just like, what the heck? And um, so then they finally just, well, they finally look at her brain, and they get a little slice of her brain tissue, and they look at it, and there's still activity in her brain cells. So she's still alive.
The hell?
Yeah. Yeah. And but then they look at the shroud again, and then they realize there's actually a Bible verse written on it. It's Leviticus, from Leviticus, about witches, and not
No, you shall not suffer witches to live, or whatever.
yeah, yeah. And then that's when the son realizes, oh, this girl was from the Salem witch trials. She was one of the people, witches from the Salem witch trials. And but then the father's like, well, there weren't actually witches there. It was just a bunch of girls, accusing each other. But then they
The
figure
original
out,
cancel culture.
yes, yes. Um, but then they kind of say, well, maybe they did some ritual on one of these girls, and it actually turned her into a witch. So that's basically what happens with that. And then I won't mention what happens to them, but yeah, it's very interesting little psychological thing, supernatural psychological thing going on here. And obviously there's obviously the mystery of like, well, what's up with this dead girl? Why is this weird stuff happening all around them? Um and I will say it is very intimate, obviously, because it's just in this one area.
Right, kind of a bottle show.
Yeah, yeah. But it's, I mean, if you're into like, uh, if you're, it's also not that, surprisingly not that. Well, there's like one part in there that's kind of bloody, but it's really not all that violent. It's more a problem I have with a lot of modern horror movies, and this movie kind of fell into that trap, is over reliance on jump scares.
Mm.
There's quite a bit of that in this. and fake jump scares too. There were like 2 or 3 fake jump scares, and it's just like, okay, come on. Jump scares don't get me that much. I'm not sure why. I guess because I know that something's coming.
Eh, Like I would say, jump scares get me, but I'm more annoyed than like, okay, you got me.
Yeah, yeah,
It's like if somebody walks up to you, goes right in your face. It's like, okay, yeah, you made me jump. What of it? Is
yeah,
this some accomplishment?
yeah. I will say the only jump scare that ever got me was there was one in the original Nightmare on Elm Street that kind of got me. That did get me the whoa, okay. Um, but other than that, yeah, not really. Yeah, I'm like you. I'm more annoyed by him. But I mean, this I thought it had there had an interesting little. This movie had an interesting little twist. And not the I'm not the biggest fan of the ending, but I kind of understand why they did it. And in a typical horror movie fashion, they kind of left it open for a sequel.
Yeah, well, it
Um,
doesn't look like one happened. Now, when I was doing a little bit of searching a minute ago, one of the top results was the Autopsy of Jane Doe 2. And I was like, what, did they make a sequel to this thing? And no, it's just lots of people speculating online that, oh, it deserves a sequel. It should have a sequel. What would a sequel be like, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah, yeah. Well, this came out in 2016, so I think
Yeah,
yeah, the chances of there being a sequel are probably very slim to none.
probably getting closer and closer to a remake rather than a sequel.
Yeah, yeah. But but yeah, and also too, if you don't if you're not squeamish with like autopsy stuff, and you don't in you're seeing a dead naked woman on a metal slab doesn't make you uncomfortable. I mean, it's certainly worth a watch. I think especially if you like horror movies. I know there are quite a few horror movie fans that enjoyed this movie, so yeah.
Well, you definitely painted a picture of an interesting mystery build-up. So it
Yeah.
sounds like it's at least clever, although it sounds like they didn't quite stick the landing.
No, it kind of, yeah, it kind of gets a little weird in a few places, but yeah,
Mm.
it's all right. It's not bad. It's on. I watched it on Shutter, but if you don't have Shutter, it's also on Netflix. So
I think slightly more people have Netflix than Shudder, just a few more.
yeah, I think just a few. Yeah.